Today we have a wonderful opportunity to hear about a special aspect of Westmont's life that many of us don't quite grab as an opportunity yet, and it's growing in our midst. We know about those 5 distinctives of Westmont. We hear them as we apply to Westmont. We hear them as we look at the website. We hear them as we learn to give tours to people in the admissions office, and all along the way we're told about those 5 things. But there are 5 institutes that are being developed. Not all of them are online yet, but one that is the Martin Institute and the Willard Center, which supports that distinctive aspect of Westmont's culture, which is its Christian identity. And these are institutes that come alongside the academic curriculum, the classroom experience, to give our witness to the community, to bring other people in, to speak to us, and to contribute to our community, and give our community a chance to reach out to a broader world with our faith and our witness to the kind of education that Westmont believes in. And today our speaker is the director of that institute, Gary Moon. And so that you just know exactly what the context is, the Martin Institute, together with the Willard Center, was founded at Westmont College for the purpose of helping to establish the field of Christian spiritual formation as a discipline of public knowledge and enhancing opportunities for meaningful dialogue with world Christianity and world religions. Pretty formal definition, but know that it's part of the heart of Westmont. It's part of what makes Westmont distinctive and helps us articulate that, bring it into our community, and send it out. I'm pleased to welcome Gary to our lectern today, especially as I represent Ben Patterson, our campus pastor, who is spending this week teaching and preaching in France. So I get to welcome you on behalf of the college, parents and guests, and also Gary. Please, Gary Moon.
It's quite an honor to be with you, even though it feels a little bit goofy, because here's John Ortberg sitting on the front row, one of the best speakers in the church. So I just got to say, John, this groupie thing you're doing has got to stop. You've got to quit following me around. It's embarrassing for both of us. No, and I was going to reference Ben, so thank you for doing that. Michael, he's in France, as some of you know, and he's ministering to some Armenian Christians, not Arminians, because he's a Calvinist. That could get ugly in no time, but it's the Armenians. I want to talk with you a bit about something that's been on my mind quite a while. It's time travel. I have a recent friend, and he claims to be one of the only over 40-year-old Christian writers in Hollywood. So we're on the next slide there. And because he's a friend, I thought I would watch some of this show that he was one of the writers, Flash Forward. I hadn't watched it, and I sort of hate I started because it's like popcorn now. I can't stop. It's not as bad as when I started watching 24. I think Regina and I watched all 168 shows in real time one week. It was a very fast week. But it's almost that good. So that has time travel in my mind, because this is a fictitious, obviously. There's a flash forward, and everyone on the planet loses consciousness, and they see their future 6 months into the future. This has me also thinking about a show that I used to watch. It was on 89 to 93, Quantum Leap. Now, I need to say real quickly, I don't actually watch TV. This is just for illustration. But I was really taken by this because this Sam, this character here, not the one with the gun, but he's part of a physics experiment that goes awry, travels back in time, he leaps into other people's bodies and kind of sets to right things that went wrong before. Well, when I think about talking to you and what possibly can someone who may be approaching middle age one of these decades have to say to you at this stage in your life, what occurred to me was if there was a possibility of time travel and I could go back to 3 or 4 moments in my life around this stage, what would I say to myself? And that's what I want to share with you. I hope it resonates with you. Otherwise, it's just an exercise in narcissism. The first place I would go back in time, I would be a freshman in college, and some of you have heard me say this, but it's just true. I grew up in rural America. In fact, so far out in the country that people who hunted had to drive back toward town to do that. I mean, that doesn't translate to California very well. That's way out in the country. But not only that, it was kind of the headquarters for a particular denomination that was Pentecostal in roots. And I tried all of my growing up years to experience some of the special effects of the charismatic movement, and I wasn't able to. And there was one time in particular, it was freshman year, they always had a revival first semester of the college year, and they bring in specialists to help you with that sort of thing. And every night I tried until the wee hours of the morning, and it just didn't work. And after the week I went home, and I felt like, spiritually speaking, I'm an ugly duckling. For some reason, God doesn't have this for me. He doesn't want to give me this, and it was just depressing. Well, if I could go back in time and then do a quick flash forward, I probably would take myself about 7 years in the future, and I'm sitting at La Casa de Maria, and I'm picking up a book of Out of Solitude by Henry Nouwen, and I discover the contemplative stream, and all of a sudden I feel like a fish or a duck back in water. But that isn't really the big news, because a lot of people in my generation have done that. Evangelicals have discovered the contemplative stream, and they write about it a lot. And sometimes you can get the idea the whole spiritual formation movement is about those folks, introverted white males. But it's not. In fact, if I could offer you something, it would be the notion of being with wherever you deeply experience God. For some of you, that might well be surfing. It might be something about the water and the look of the green on the shore and catching a wave and getting lost in a moment and having a unitive experience. If it is, I would say do more of that. For some of you, it might be service. For both of my daughters, it would be service, especially the disenfranchised, the homeless. Some of you, it might be study. It might be finding and unlocking the correct tense of a Greek word that spills out new meaning. But what I really want to say about this, besides it's just so important to find where we meet God and celebrate it, is the other thing I discovered as the years passed is, in addition to that there was something incredibly important and powerful about each of the great traditions of Christian faith. And for me, they almost have become like food groups. Whether it's the contemplative, which is my favorite, or the holiness, which isn't, but I know it's important, or social justice, or evangelical, incarnational, or even charismatic, to celebrate where I most easily find God, but to look at all the streams as a type of diet or something to be enjoyed, to draw from. The second moment I would travel back in time to help myself with, I would be in my living room, and it was between, it's about one semester into the sophomore year, and I had quite a dilemma on my hands. I had not picked out what I was going to major in, and I had not yet discovered for sure who I was going to marry, and I was pretty distraught about it, because more the latter than the former, but the former was weighing me down too. In my math and science skills are much better than my verbal skills. It shows up in significant fashion in standardized test scores. So I assumed I was going to be a physician. But I'd spent a couple of years as an orderly, and there's a lot of blood and phlegm and stuff in hospitals. And so I had ruled that out. And the verbal skills had sort of ruled out all the reading that would be involved in law school. I wasn't exposed to anybody from the business world, and most people in my family were educators and taught school, and that just seemed like something I did not want to do. So I was wondering, what am I going to do? I have no clue, and I'm running out of time here. If I could travel back in time, one of the things I would say to myself is, it gets better real soon. You're going to take a psychology class next semester, and you're going to love it, and you're going to do that through a PhD, and it's going to be cool. And you've already met the person you're going to marry, and that's going to be good too. But that's not what I would tell you is the real big story. The real big story was content doesn't matter that much. It's more process and methodology. Let me try to explain that. Later, from those years in life, I wrote the first book I ever wrote. I'm not sure anybody's read it yet, but it's there. And I was at this gathering. The publisher had a gathering and thought it would be a good idea for me at that time, younger, first book. And this other guy, Charlie Shedd, who had written 40 books, he's probably before your time, but at one point, he was a pretty big deal. A couple of his books sold 10 million copies, Letters to Karen, Letters to Philip. I may have mentioned, he was called the Pope of the Presbyterian Church for about a decade there. And so we were at this dinner, and we hit it off, and we decided to write a book together called I'm Odd, Thank God, about how being a Christian is supposed to be about odd making, becoming oddly loving and oddly joyful and oddly peaceful and so forth. And so for about 3 years, I did this. It wasn't Tuesdays with Maury, but it was Thursdays with Charlie, about 3 Thursdays a month for 3 years. And we worked on this book and got to know each other. And I was convinced we're going to do this book together, and I'm finally going to be discovered as a writer. Didn't work out that way. Charlie, during the last year of our time together, had dementia that progressed very rapidly. And pretty soon he didn't recognize his own voice in the pages that we were shuffling and working on. And pretty soon I just had to give the project to him. And it never happened as he slipped further and further behind a curtain of dementia. It was self-published, but it never happened according to the vision. But here's the deal. The book was the content. The process was I spent 3 years with this incredible person, and I can't sit down hardly to do an email now without hearing his voice in my head. Certainly if I'm writing something, I hear him say, hey, never more than 15 words to a sentence if you want people to read it. No one cares about your but your mama, so don't say I, say you. Use picturesque speech. Don't say the person fell down. Where else would they fall? Thousands of Charlieisms. And that was the point, not the content. Now, why am I saying that? Because I discovered psychology 3 years after I get a doctorate in psychology and I'm licensed. I hardly do anything psychological since. It wasn't the content, it was the process. Regina and I both take the Myers-Briggs without sharing any common letters or having any letters left over. And we've changed in 180 degrees at least 3 times. It was the process that mattered, the process of learning how to be with, especially being with God. One last thing, Regina, thank you for this, for allowing me to say this. No, it's not bad. It's not what you think. It's the good one. So since we don't share common letters, and I'm more of a J on the Myers-Briggs, Regina more of a P. I can do an antique store in just minutes. Doesn't take me long, In most any shopping endeavor, I can really do fast. And Regina likes a slower approach. And I'm often way too many steps out in front. And one time she said something that was just so spiritually sensitive. She said, hey, can you reach my hand from there? Well, I couldn't. I was too far out in front. But that became a metaphor with God. Hearing God whisper, hey, can you reach my hand from there? What I really would like to tell myself about that second thing isn't that don't worry, you'll find a major and a spouse. It's what really matters is the process and the methodology, living life with God. Well, the third time I would travel back to, this was a little bit harder to talk about, but sometime around age 28 or 29, I was doing a 30-day Ignation Retreat. 30 days. So some of you probably know what that is, some of you don't, but it's a lot of time. It's heaven for a contemplative and just the opposite for most other of it if you're not. But 6 hours a day, 5 or 6 hours a day, prayerful reflection, meditation, and you do these exercises, and one of them is you imagine that you attend your own deathbed. So I'm sitting and envisioning this deathbed scene. I'm in a hospital. There's this white iron bed, and light streaming through these kind of sheer curtains, cinder block, white walls. No one's in the room but me. I hear evidence of nurses around somewhere, but no one's in the room but me. Regina's not in the room. My daughters, one was born then, one isn't in the room. It's just me and a file cabinet. And the file cabinet has hundreds of peer review articles in it. And that really scared me. That I could live my life, and I'm already on the path of living my life, where that's what the deathbed could look like. And so if I could travel back in time and give myself some assurance at that point, what I would do is I would tell myself about something called the cycle of grace. And what I'm about to share with you isn't original. In fact, there's a psychiatrist, Frank Lake. He was from England. He was a pretty big deal back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, a colleague of Emil Brunner. He worked on this with Emil Brunner. And in fact, it's in book form now by Trevor Hudson, Methodist pastor from South Africa. This isn't original stuff, but I would tell myself about this. And I would say, Frank Lake had a concern about people burning out. He was in India, and he noticed missionaries in particular would come with all kind of enthusiasm, and after a year or two or less, they're kind of fried. And he wondered, why is this? And his whole concept was clinical theology. What if theology were applied in a clinical setting? And so he started thinking, how would Jesus be a missionary in India? And he came up with something called the cycle of grace, where it talks about the importance of inflow, receiving, and for that to be balanced with the outflow, with the giving out. And he said, looking at the life of Jesus, that acceptance was foundational. That Jesus was nurtured in the womb by a loving mother. He was raised by parents who provided protection, guidance, and care. He had quite a confident spirit that you see with him as an adolescent in the temple. But then, two defining moments. The first is his baptism. What happens? This voice from heaven, his dad, says, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased." And that's repeated at the Transfiguration. That Jesus' life and ministry started with a profound sense of knowing that he was the beloved, the beloved. The next thing, life of Jesus, sustaining grace. Again, this is flowing into the person. And I'm going to use this third slide here just to kind of as a model. You've probably seen me do this last year in chapel, but it's just an overview of the components of the person. But that Jesus took time to be sustained. He prayed, a spirit thing. He had a close group of followers, his disciples, social sustenance. He worshiped in the synagogue, spirit. He spent time with table fellowship with others, social. He fed upon scriptures, mind, thought life. Spent time in solitude, spirit. Went for long walks, body. He enjoyed God's creation, spirit, feelings. He knew the value of rest and sleep, even if it's in a boat, body. He welcomed children, social, feeling. That Jesus took time to be sustained before anything starts flowing out. So let's go to the next slide. Significance, the grace of significance. Who we are being, not what we're doing yet, who we are being. The root word of significance is sign, and the question is, what does my or your life point to or signify? In our culture, significance can be found in money, what I have and work, what I do, reputation, what others think of me. To the world, Jesus' life must have seemed very insignificant. But the question for us is, do we know who we are apart from money and work and reputation? What is your significance without using any of those words to talk about it? What is your unique way of being in the world? What's your unique gift that you bring into every situation? Your special message, your special way of simply being. For Trevor Hudson, the writer of the book that I'm referencing, he says his primary sense of being is that of a companion or a friend. For me, my being is more of a synthesizer an architect. For Jesus, it's the great I am statements. But just who are we? Because another way to burn out, but beyond not starting with acceptance, not taking time for sustenance, is working in ways that are far apart from just who we are. The last thing, and finally, the fourth, to complete the circle, is achievement. And out of that, there is the grace of fruitfulness. Doing what we do with the fruit of the Spirit as a very character of our lives. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because what I would have told myself if I could have traveled back in time was that most people, and we'll flip through these other 4 slides fairly quickly, do it just the opposite. That most of us start with achievement. And we move from achievement and hope that we can turn that achievement into a sense of significance. And in feeling significant, we might be able to exchange that for ways that bring us sustaining strength. And our hope is that if all that happens, we might be acceptable. Most of us work the cycle of grace backwards. I know I was in my late 20s with a strange peering into the future. Just a few more minutes with you. I want to transition and talk about 2 types of knowing because it isn't obvious yet. But most all of what I'm saying is about these 3 things that I would tell myself if I could travel back in time were an encouragement to know experientially the Trinity. Not just with the head, but also the heart. Next slide. There is a book called Russian Mystics. It's written by Sergei Bolshakov. He has this to say, and I'm going to go slowly with this because it's one word that might be tricky for some of us, me in particular. Once theology and mysticism, okay, stop right there, mysticism. I'm not talking about something that starts in a mist, that ends in a schism because there's too much I in the middle. I'm talking about, and thank you for being here, John, I'm talking about what I've heard you say. What is a mystic? Someone who believes if you talk to God, he might actually be listening and might even say something back. That's all I mean by mysticism. Once theology and the experience of God start to drift apart, the former tends invariably to become a theology of concepts, a mere religious philosophy. Those who teach theology may cease to live up to it as the mystics, as the experiential theologians did. In order to return to the great age of theology, dogma must be brought back to life and experienced. One of the things that I'm so drawn to as far as with Dallas Willard, and incidentally, he's in very poor health. I just got notice today that it's not looking good. But he has this belief about the kingdom of heaven. It's here in our midst as if it were a 7th dimension of reality that you can actually step into and experience. Just that simple. That it's an experiential reality. Everything that I would have said to myself if I could travel back in time is about, last slide, knowing experientially versus only knowing with the head. The first thing I would have said to myself, it is important to find our own best way of experiencing God, of knowing God by heart and swim in it. And then I've told myself that it is the methodology of knowing by being with that is more important than most any content area that we will come up with. Finally, I would have said, the cycle of grace begins by knowing that you are God's beloved. And that achievement is way downstream from that sense of knowing and needs to flow out of that deep sense of knowing. Joel, I think in the worship team are going to come back and play a song, and we do nothing but just take 5 minutes to experience God as the song rolls by, and then I think Michael's going to come and dismiss us.